All right, hello and welcome everyone. I see we have a few more people logged in. Again, my name is Sarah Lustig and I am your co-host and moderator for today. I want to welcome all of you to today's session from Credo InfoLit Learning Community. But before we officially begin, I'm going to introduce Henrietta Verma. She is from Credo and she's here to tell us a little bit more about today's sessions. And I'm sure that she has some information about Elise as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And go ahead, Henrietta, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah, and hi, Elise. I'm glad you ironed out those technical issues and were able to join us. And hello to the audience. Today we are featuring several speakers who were at the recent Georgia International Conference on Information Literacy that happened a few weeks ago. Our first speaker is going to be Elise Eidman-Adal. You see her there on the screen already, and Elise is from the National Writing Project. She was the keynote speaker at the conference, so she's going to give us, I believe, a taste of her keynote address, maybe not the whole thing, because time probably won't allow. So thank you, Elise. And then after Elise, we're going to have April Shepard, who is at Arkansas State University. And she's going to discuss a partnership, a successful partnership that she conducted between her library and a regional high school in which they used Credo reference to help out the students. And then we are going to have two presenters together who were at the Georgia conference a few weeks ago, and they are Shannon Johnson and Sarah Wagner of Purdue University, and they're going to discuss digital badging. But first of all, Elise, it's all yours.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And delighted to be able to be part of your community today. I need to start by saying if you saw any of the advertisements for the quite fabulous conference that all these sessions are drawn from, you probably noticed that I had about the most depressing title for my keynote talk. So there it is. We're doomed. Now what? And what a way to start even this particular webinar with something so depressing as we're doomed. But part of what I was trying to do was to capture a moment about how I'm feeling, and maybe some of you that are listening as well. I am, as you know, from the National Writing Project, so my focus is really about young writers and producers and how we teach them. And for a long time, I've been really a proponent of what the internet brings us as kind of a gift to writers and a gift to teachers of writers, and been quite a proponent of incorporating the digital shift in our work. And there always have been sort of three pieces to that for those of us that are teachers of writing. And one is that the internet and new digital tools have this amazing low barrier of entry, so that even quite young students can start to use digital tools and publish their work on the internet. And that's a kind of exciting thing for writing teachers who can remember the days when we didn't have those tools. And increasingly, digital tools, they allow for a very professional and very polished product, so that even beginners, in a way, can start to see the shape of a very exciting product that they could create and that they could share through the internet. And of course, then the web allows us to share that product, circulate it directly really to a worldwide audience. And for a lot of us, those were amazing new affordances that we could use with young writers. Now, we were very positive about that, but just to say, 2016 to today, just to name a few things that would lead us to question that enthusiasm. This is a list of stuff I'll go through quickly because you've been living the same lives and following the same news since 2016. 2016, then President Obama sat down and talked to us all about Macedonian teenagers, fake websites, Facebook pages, etc. Macedonian teenagers. And it wasn't just Macedonian teenagers. It was also Russian. It was also a whole wave of people, the whole fake news piece. And it wasn't just people who were abroad. It was actually not just foreign nationals. There were plenty of people in the United States, maybe formerly some of our own students, creating and circulating fake news. So the fake news conversation. And then it's actually not just Facebook pages and fake news websites, but also a systems manipulation, the way that people are able to manipulate algorithms and search CEO and that sort of thing in order to, in effect, game the system of circulation and social media and the internet in order to promote their work. Very smart, very dangerous. Because we saw that a lot of this had pretty nefarious intent. And the list of things that we've discovered since then has only grown and grown and grown. And we now have the situation where we see, in fact, the destabilizing effect that much of this has had on our political life. And it's a worry we all share. Recent news, all the more, has made that significant. It is a lot political, but of course, it's also commercial. It also has its money-making elements. And it might as easily be something like marketing medical products as it might be something directly political. And as we've started to see, and this is a big turn, I think, for any of us who care about education, that the kind of fake news, nefarious content is showing up in many cases in student research work. I've been using the word fake news, and a lot of us have noted that this is actually really a problematic term. So I'm using it right now because it is something that kind of names a phenomenon that those of us that are concerned about information literacy can kind of identify. But the term has really become sort of unusable. But just at that time, the word fake news, we start to get even more information about the possibility for deep fakes. And you may have seen some of this, where in fact the opportunity to fake things has gone far beyond really our opportunity in some cases now to identify easily the credibility of sources. You may have seen the recent piece that the New York Times has just started, fake or photo. Can people identify whether they're looking at a computer-generated fake or an actual news photo? And what folks have found in that recent quiz or in things like these video deepfakes is that even experts find it pretty hard to tell. So that's where I started to feel doomed, I have to say, when the news of the deepfakes started to come and the examples of the deepfakes. And I went back to my 3 points and I thought, oh my God, low barrier. Pretty much anybody can take their content public. And new digital tools allowing for very polished and professional looking products. Yikes, these are very polished and very professional looking. And they can come from anywhere and they can go anywhere. So that was the piece that started to make me feel like oh my gosh, we care about information literacy and it's feeling a little doomed right now. So the title, We're Doomed, Now What? Actually came from an adjacent place. This book by Roy Scranton, which is really about climate change, another place where some folks are feeling fairly doomed, but actually opening up the question, okay, deal with, understand how challenging the situation is, and now what? Old tools may not actually be able to deal with the situation in front of us. And in fact, I've been working in another project with some clients, climate scientists, and I was really interested in how, given how bad the news is, even the recent news, how actually they're feeling both doomed but actually positive about what can be done. So I thought a bit in this feeling of doom about what I was learning from these climate educators, and they were encouraging me to remember that when something is large and interconnected, all of us have a role in it, which means all of our work might be significant. One. Second thing that they reminded me of is that actually it's up to young people to live forward in the world. And so let's understand our students and the journey that they're taking. They're starting at a different place than we are in their journey. That young people are interested in what we think are questions, are dilemmas, and that what we need to help them develop is resiliency and stewardship for an environment. And because I had always thought about, in a way, information as a kind of ecosystem, a kind of information environment in which we grow up and live, I wanted to take that into my work. So the bulk of what I shared comes from some work that I did with young people around this particular website, which is a website that invited ultimately 20,000 young people to start to write about an issue they cared about at the time of the last election, 2016. It's called Letters to the Next President. And the young people here are 13 to 18. For those of you who are teaching in higher ed, these are the young people who are coming to you. And I went through an informal conversation and focus group with a large number of them from around the country in different kinds of places, and took from that some lessons that I'd like to share in the last few minutes. When I talked to these students, a couple hundred of them, what I would say I learned about this rising generation is this is not a generation that is naive about the internet. Some recent poll results, some with K-12 students, and then just in the last couple of days, a survey of about 6,000 college students, suggests that actually they're pretty clear about the problems with information on the internet. They are not at all naive, but they did feel very alone in figuring out how to live in a universe in a way where they lacked trust in the core tools that they use to get through their lives. They were working hard, I learned, but sometimes their hard work produced buggy routines that we might want to know about because we can help young people move through them. They thought of information literacy, and in fact, the lessons that they had learned from their teachers was that information literacy was about the credibility of an item. I'll talk more, by the way, about all 5 of these. I learned that the way that they thought about search was online shopping, and that in all of that, they were extremely hungry for conversation and exemplars really, of how adults are trying to navigate this same environment that we're in. So let me go through these a little bit. First, about working so hard, distrusting information, but feeling alone in the quest. A lot of young people that I talked to reported that because of our particular political environment right now, adults were very hesitant to talk with them about the questions of the news and information that they were seeing. They were shut down a lot, or they were nervous about bringing it up. So I would say one easy takeaway is that there is a tremendous hunger from young people to have a real and an honest conversation about credibility, about fake news. They'll be carrying all kinds of perspectives, but there is a hunger for discussion that I think is really positive for us who are teachers right now. Because they were very aware and not at all naive about the potential for problems that they might encounter on the internet, that piece of media literacy had been done. They worked very hard to figure out how to navigate. And sometimes they came up with routines that were actually counterproductive. I told a story, for example, from one young woman who, in trying to find more credible information than what she easily came to in search, and yes, true, search means often Google, and it means the first page or two, but she was searching for open education information resources because she thought those were biased and more neutral. And so she was puzzled and asked, why was she getting so much partisan information when she looked for open educational resources? Is this because educators are crazy biased, or what was that about? And in a sidebar conversation, I asked her what she was doing, and she was actually searching for op-eds, open educational resources. Of course, she was finding op-eds, and they were partisan. And so she was actually doing a routine that no one would have predicted, no one would have made a lesson about. You could only have learned this from hearing from this young woman. And then we had a conversation about what an op-ed was. And what was fascinating was to see the difference between where someone like myself might start, who grew up around a paper newspaper and used to open it up and see the editorials on one side, and the opposite the editorial page, the guest writers and letters and op-ed writers opposite the editorial page. And that entire structure of editorials and op-eds is something that she never grew up with, and that she's only seen things in a feed. And she's only seen things on cable news programs where the talking heads look like news people. And you can't tell much the difference between news content and editorial content. That's part of both an illustration of one of the buggy routines that we surfaced as we all talked, but then also a sense that young people are starting actually at a very different place than those of us who grew up and moved through several different information environments as we developed our own information literacy. So buggy routines, all of which can only really be surfaced in a way through open conversation. I found that pretty much all the young people that I talked to had been given information literacy units and lessons in their K-12 education, and in many cases a fair amount. So that's something that we can be happy about, that K-12 schools are not neglecting to do that. However, almost all of them reported that the way information literacy was approached, and something that was probably really familiar to people in this particular community, was to look at items. For example, a website, to go through a kind of standard collection of questions, ways to check the credibility of a particular website or a particular article. So the sense is that there are things, items, and you check those items out. That's a very useful thing, but what it didn't account for was a kind of bigger picture of the systems part of the web. So, for example, it wouldn't account for how individuals can, quote, game the system, as I said earlier. It didn't account for the way that sponsorship or business processes or algorithms of the web itself might actually influence what you're seeing. The kind of thing that we like to point out when we have young people do a Google search on the same term and see that everybody else is getting slightly different results tailored to their search history. Those kinds of things rarely came up because it seemed to be much from, as they described their experiences, that whatever you were presented with, then you went through some checking rules to look at the thing. But it didn't often take the question, how did you get to that thing? Or what are the implications for that thing? Partially in that thing-like way, when they talked about searching for information, which all of them had to do in order to complete the task on the website, they talked about search on the web very much as if you would talk about online shopping. And part of that might not be so bad because we search for items on the web. But on the other hand, it tells us something about the model of what they might think is the information at the other side. They looked for an information package that was like you might be looking for shoes. Are there some that fit you exactly? Are they exactly what you're looking for? And you search until you find the right color and the right size. And the goal of the person with the information, like the goal of the shoe manufacturer, should be to tailor the product to you specifically. They didn't think very much about pulling websites or information sources apart. And an analogy that I used was, or that came up at the conference was, you know, if you're buying shoes, you don't buy a set of shoes just to pull the laces out, to quote someone's analogy in a conversation at the conference. Even though the laces might be actually what you need in your writing or in your thinking. You kind of take the package as a package and you search until you find the package and just cite from or use material within that. So in a way, the issue there was a little less the search than it was, what is this product, this thing called information that you're looking for when we say as teachers or librarians, go find some information about. And then finally, one of the things that was most interesting to them was the opportunity to have conversation and to see what other adults living in the same information environment did they were aware that it's hard for all of us and that many of us are puzzled or fooled or struggling with some of the same issues. So what do, for example, journalists do? What do researchers do? What is it that more experienced and better able adults do? And they loved having conversations with their teachers. I learned that they trusted their teachers and their librarians to help them. But they actually were very hungry for other kinds of experts outside of the educational context, people whose profession required them, especially, for example, journalists, to think about and react quickly to the question of information veracity and credibility. So I know that's a quick run through of the areas that we looked at together with students, but what I would say is that all of those conversations sort of gave me a window into what could be a next way of thinking about our common interests as educators in information literacy. What if not that everything we've been doing is wrong? There's a lot that we've been doing that clearly is right, and these young people show that. But if we were to expand or rethink, take up the question of now what might be some of the content, what might be some of the routines and habits that we might want to teach, what might be some of the models that would be useful for students starting at the place where young people are starting now. And just to give you a window into some of that. In terms of content, there certainly is a tremendous amount already of the toolkit variety that many of us have used quite positively and brought into our teaching, and that for those of us that sources like these are new, you'll find a lot of this on the web. It's a good chance for me to tell you that, good opportunity to say that I'll give you a bit.ly at the end where you can find many of these resources. So there is good content out there that is useful and pretty up to date. But there's also content that young people that I talk to had not been introduced to that we may want to introduce. More about the systems bit, for example, like the book Weapons of Mass Destruction, which is about algorithms and the role of algorithms in our lives. Or books like Bunk or Fantasyland that's about hoaxes and hokum and the long history of hoaxing, for example, that has followed all kinds of media environments and been reinvented every time there is a new media environment that's developed. Or questions like, should bots have free speech? These kinds of things really interested the young people I talked to because it seemed to point them to content about the new environment, this piece that was not in their media literacy training, but in effect they thought really was going to govern the environment that they were going to be living in as adults. Also, in terms of routines and habits, very productive, the kinds of things that are drawn really from places like journalism and journalists, like Mike Caulfield's work on web literacy for student fact checkers. That really comes from the fact-checking tradition, the journalist tradition, more than an academic tradition. And part of what's interesting about these routines and habits is that they are short, they are fast, they work in a social media speed environment. And we could get young people doing this kind of thing sort of all the time. Rather than a unit on media literacy, a kind of really quick check that could happen all the time around new perspectives, information, things that we should check. So maybe some new routines and habits. And for models, I would say that they were tremendously fascinated and much helped by hearing the stories of journalists, especially journalists that are covering breaking news, the kind of journalists that the organization and Project First Draft News is aimed at, that sort of helps journalists think about how they navigate initial coverage of an event and check out the veracity of a photo you've just seen on social media, or a meme that's circulating, or a particular quote, that kind of thing. These, which there are many resources about in my resource list, felt to these young people particularly helpful. And I know that we're running out of time, and I'm sorry for the speed, but again, you'll be able to find those resources. They also were interested in how this could happen in the disciplines, and there are some examples of hoax and fakery that show up in the disciplines as well, as people try to modify the message that history might be sending us or sociology might be sending us. So to conclude, here we are in 2018 with a sense of where information literacy work might go in the future. I want to just end by with one particular discussion, which came from one young woman basically saying this quote. And I think this quote pretty much summarized the feeling of so many of the young people I talked to, that in fact there is so much fakery out there that the best stance is to really not believe anything. And that opened up a conversation that I would really encourage all of us librarians and educators to go ahead and explore with young people. I'm going to wrap up really quickly because I know I'm out of the time, but I want to just say, share this quote from Mike Caulfield. For those of us that are concerned about media literacy or information literacy, it's not just debunking. It actually has to also be about the signals of trust. How can you build a relationship with a particular media source, an understanding of what to trust, because you can't go through your lives distrusting everything. You have to learn what you can trust. I think that I would end by saying that students are at a different starting place now. What to trust is maybe the bigger question. It's less they believe everything and how do we get them to be distrustful. It might be a little more they believe almost nothing and how do we get them to feel confident in some sources. And I think that academics and academic librarians are in a unique position to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elise. To remind everyone, I have that link and I'm going to post that right here in the chat for everyone.
That's great. Thank you.
Here you go. If you want to review her slides, they're in the online community for you. And please reach out to her in the online discussion. I have posted that link for you in the chat. Thank you so much, Elise. April, as soon as you are ready, you can join us.
Hello.
Hi. So let's just turn on your camera, press start sharing, and we are ready to go.
Let's see. Now, can you see me?
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Take it away.
All right. So it's kind of interesting that Elise was first and I'm second because mine kind of fits into helping students be successful. And as librarians, especially if you're at the academic level, we know about library anxiety. We know that information literacy really helps students be successful. And it's not just research. Students who use libraries have higher retention. They have higher GPAs. There's a lot of literature that looks at it at the academic level. And we got to having some conversations at my university at Arkansas State. And we kind of thought, well, what happens if we get them younger? You know, it's so overwhelming to become a freshman and you're going from that high school experience to that college experience. Everything's going on. Now you got to learn information literacy. So we started looking at working with the local high schools, seeing what we could do for them. And we had this chance conversation about, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago with Ian Singer at Credo. He got to talking about what we want to do, and it happened to be that they were doing some work with high schools too. So we joined up. We have this partnership. It's us, Credo, and I believe we have 12 local high schools that we're working with. So this is just going to be what we're doing. The first reason we wanted to do it was just to be a good neighbor. I think, especially at the university levels, we do need to give back to our communities. We, give back to the schools. These are our future students. But we knew that wasn't going to work with administration. We got to have tangible, measurable results. So we had 3 goals. Our first goal is to make high school students better prepared for college. So what we were hoping to see is that students who are in the schools that have access to the Credo project, plus the additional instructions that they're going to have higher high school GPA, higher ACT, SAT scores, and then lower numbers of remedial classes when they're coming into the college level. So, not only help them at college, but we do want to help them at their level. Our second goal is to improve the success when they come in. So we wanted them to have higher acceptance rates, higher retention rates, and higher graduation rates. And it was really important to us that this was across the board. So regardless of if you go to community college, a different university out of state, we just want you to be successful. We'd love you to come to Arkansas State University, but if you don't, wherever you go, be successful. And then our third goal is we wanted to improve our relationship with local schools. We kind of siloed ourselves out. We have a history, unfortunately, in my region where Arkansas State, we were kind of clustered. We have our own zip code, and we didn't really do a lot with our communities. And so we've been really working hard the last, I guess, 10 years or so to get out and do more. And that's one thing we saw was when we started working with the schools, they were like, okay, but what do you really want from us? And we had to explain that we really do want to have this partnership with these schools, and it's been going really well. Credo has similar goals with what they're calling their building bridges. So they're pretty much 100% aligned with us. So they're looking at recruitment, retention, remediation too, looking at improving college readiness, the success of incoming freshmen, and then we also worked on building a learning community. And I'll talk a little bit more about this learning community that we have. So our role, we provide Credo Seek and InfoLit modules to 13, I got the number wrong earlier, 13 local high schools. We do pay for it. We decided that it was worth it, that this is where we would put some of our money. We also provide training. We'll go into the schools, work with the teachers, work with the media specialists. I have a librarian who I believe next week is going to go into some Comp 2 classes at a local high school and work with them on some different things. Not even Credo Seek at that point. He's doing some internet things with them. Let's see, last year we had 62 classroom visits and we had face-to-face contact with over 2,000 students. That's a lot of students in our area. Most of them are very close to Arkansas State, but we do have some schools that are over an hour away, and we will drive and we will interact with them. We will meet with them, meet with the media specialists, the principals, those type of things. Make sure that they have the skills. We also make sure that they're connected to state resources, because we discovered that some schools were and some schools weren't, so just making sure as much help as we can give. We have our learning community, so pretty much we have representatives from every school. We learned very quickly that the preferred representative from each school is different. We have one school the principal wants to be involved, and some it's the teacher, some it's the media specialist. And then it's me, and then people from Credo. So we get together. We have a meeting twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. We just talk about what's going on, what's working in your school, what's not working in your schools. And then I talk a lot about the college experience. What can their students expect when they get to college? So we make sure that they're prepared. And also, what can Arkansas State do for the schools? Or do you have enough resources? Do you have enough support? Those type of things. And then Lara and I, Lara's with Credo, we've been doing a monthly email. So we do an email. We have a resource sharing page where we just put blog posts, articles, things like that, conferences, videos that the teachers might find interesting. It's all about information literacy. So measuring success. None of this would work if we couldn't measure our success. So we are in our third year now, so we have some preliminary data. On the screen you'll see our baseline data. So out of the students who apply for at Arkansas State, 35 actually registered, 21% need remediation, almost 3.5 GPA, a 23 ACT, and then an average A-State GPA of right under 3. So that's the baseline for all students, regardless of which school they come from. So we started looking to see, are we starting to see some preliminary results? Is there looking like it might make a difference? And happily there is. I'm very glad to see that it looks like there is. So our remission rates, not huge big numbers, but still 2015, that was our first year. So those students had about a 2% higher admission rate into Arkansas State University. 2016, that's right about 6%. And you can see how big that number changed in 2017. So 77% of the students from these schools that we have now been in 3 years got admitted to Arkansas State, whereas only 65% of the overall incoming student body got admitted. So we're hoping that it's us making part of the difference. Registration rates, this is one area where we saw a really big difference. The students who do participate in the program do seem like they're coming here at a higher percentage than overall students. So they're used to seeing us, and we actually have this happen on a regular basis. The student will come in and say, you came to my class, you talked with me, you're my librarian. We have a current student worker who was actually a student in one of these classes. She came to Arkansas State, decided she was going to work in our library because of this interaction that we had with her. So you're looking, 15, 20% difference between the overall population and then our students, coming here, which is really good, obviously, for our budget because we like tuition, but that's not the only reason why. Retention, this was something that we were very proud of. The students who came from these high schools that we work with have higher first year and second year retention. I don't have the second year numbers there because we only have 1 year of second year retention numbers. But a 77 versus a 74 may not seem like it's a big difference, but it really is. So we're seeing that, and the students are coming back, and so hopefully we can keep them on track and get them graduating on time. No one's been all the way through yet. Still going to be a couple years before we can see those graduation rates. But we're hoping as we're seeing these increased retention that we're going to see increased graduations. Remediation, this is another area that we wanted to look at, and we do see that the students who are coming from our high schools are requiring less remediation. So in 2015, that's a 13% versus a 22% of the overall student population, which is good because that's tuition they have to pay, and we know college is so expensive. It's a little frustrating, sometimes a little demoralizing if you've got to come in and go straight into remediation. So it just helps them stay on track. Without that remediation, they're hopefully graduating on time because they don't have to take the extra classes, and they're a little bit more prepared. I know I went through my slides really fast. I don't know what to talk about now. Do you want to start the next one, or do you want me just to talk more about our project?
Hi, April. Yeah, take a few moments if you could just talk a little bit more about your project. We'd love to hear that.
Sure. I'll talk a little bit more about why we kind of did this. I went into the goals, but another reason was funding. Our state does have a funding formula that is based on student retention, student success, things like that, graduation rates. And that's not the main reason we did it. It was for us to get funding because it doesn't really affect the library. But that was part of this bill we gave administration. So we went to administration. We said we have this idea, but it's not for our students. It's for our future students and what we hope is going to be our future students. And we may be benefiting students who may never come to our school. They may go to a competing university. But this is what we think it's going to do. And so we brought them in, and we kind of did this little spiel of we're helping with the funding formula because in the state of Arkansas, our governor wants, we have to prove that we're retaining our students. We have to show remediation. We have to show graduation rates, all of these types of things that we know information literacy does. And it was nice because administration was on board. A lot of schools, when you want to do something, especially big, especially something that is really kind of new, we didn't have a lot of literature of other schools doing this, and the few cases we found of other universities that work with high school went horribly wrong. So that was a little bit frustrating, but ours did pretty good. For what we did with the students, it just really depends on what classes, what schools. Some schools are really hands-on. We go in, we talk about information literacy, about Boolean searching, how to look at websites, how to do good Google searches, how to know if your website's good or bad, how to come up with topics, concept maps, how to use Credo, how to use other resources like ProQuest. And just whatever the teacher wants, we cater everything to what's going on in the classroom. And so we have days where we're in the classroom maybe an hour just for a session, and there's sometimes we're in there all day long. So it just really depends, again, what is asked for the school. There's some schools where they just don't really work with us a whole lot, and that's okay. They're using the resource. We can pull stats, and we can see that they're using Credo Seek, things like that, but they don't really need us to come in, and some just want a little extra help, and we come in and whatever they want. A lot of comp, I'm answering questions, by the way. We do a lot of comp classes, a lot of history, but a little bit of everything. I've done science too.
That's great. Thank you so much, April. I just want to remind everyone, if you have any more follow-up questions for April or any of our speakers, please do take a look at the follow-up discussion. I will post that link in here for you again. I did also post your email. So thank you so much, April. We truly appreciate you being here with us today. Okay, great.
I'm happy to answer questions.
So hang out in the room if you are able to, and then any other questions, we're going to do in that follow-up discussion in the online learning community. Thanks, April.
Thank you.
All right, we have Shannon and Sarah for our final session. Let's come on camera. Hi, how are you?
Hello.
All right, well, without further ado, I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah, so I am Sarah Wagner, and this is my colleague Shannon Johnson, and we're going to talk to you guys today about some of the work that we've done with digital badging at Purdue University Fort Wayne. So to kind of set the scene, I know most people are familiar with the concept of digital badging, but in the theme of the Georgia Information Literacy Conference, we did tie it back to Juliette Gordon-Low and the concept of the Girl Scouts who do award badges for sort of an achievement or learning. And in digital badging, we kind of wanted to translate that skill over to award badges when students had learned a concept and to tie it to an achievement or accomplishment. If you're not familiar with digital badges, one of the great things that they can do is that they can be translated onto an online profile. So if a student is working on building a LinkedIn profile or another like professional web page, they can on that page display that they have earned a digital badge in information literacy or media literacy or the different concepts that they have mastered.
So when we started this project, we're specifically gearing it towards our student worker population so that they can try and translate the skills that they have developed working for the library into skills that are marketable in workforce outside of the building. And that was something that we knew they were having some difficulty doing.
So we've got a list here of common platforms that you might see digital badges on. I think Credly is one of the biggest ones. So if you're interested in digital badges, that's definitely one to check out. Open Badges is I believe it's an open source platform. Yes, he's not. The platform that we used is actually the one at the top, which is called Passport. And Passport is a proprietary program that was developed by Purdue University. And we have access to it through as part of a branch of Purdue University. So there were a lot of things that made using that platform a little bit easier for us in our particular situation.
Mostly it was free.
Yes.
I'll be honest, it was free.
Yeah. that helps. And I believe there are badges can be used in learning management systems as well. My understanding is that the system we use, Blackboard, does have a badging capability, but it was not as user-friendly, or it didn't quite function the way that we wanted it to. And Passport has a pretty clean look to it. And this actually, I know the screen is probably pretty tiny for you, but this is a screenshot of what it looks like within Passport. And this is a list of the badging modules that we have been working on building out. And as Shannon mentioned, this is primarily geared towards our student workers. So we do have
Let me
silence
my phone.
We would like to expand this to our entire student population, but in terms of getting things off the ground and working, we have targeted our library student workers as people we can start using this with right now, and to work out any of the problems that we might experience on this platform. One of the things that we often get with student workers, but also students in our class, is kind of that, well, but I've already done this before. And one of the nice things with digital badging is that it can allow us to build a series of modules and set prerequisites so that if a student has done it before and they've truly mastered that skill, they can move on to the next level. And continue to sort of motivate them to continue progressing in their education. Anything to add?
Are we going to talk about the structure in the next slide?
I don't think we are.
Okay.
So we probably should talk about the structure.
All right. So most digital badging platforms allow for you to scaffold the badges, as she was saying, with prerequisites. So one of the things that we did when we built these was make the lowest tier of badges sort of self-running. So our students could get the very base level skills without a lot of our time spent working on the assessment pieces. And then, so there's, I believe it's 6 badges on the base level. And then once they complete those 6, they can move to the second tier. And the second tier is where they're going to have a little bit more of our hands-on assessment. So we'll actually have to interact with the student worker to gauge their skill level a little bit before they can pass that badge level. And then the next level up is even more rigorous, and that's where we're bringing in some online learning scenarios that are customized to the situation, and we're going to test them on skill accumulation. So taking them, for example, all the way through a reference interview where they're going to have to demonstrate not just the reference interview skill itself, but also keyword formulation, vetting credible information, the whole package. And they're interactive, so if they do something that goes slightly off kilter, then the fake patron reacts negatively or so forth.
Yeah, and one thing kind of to going off that point is to keep in mind, if you're interested in building out digital badges, is to keep your assessment sort of in mind, what assessment methodology you want to use. So typically the choices we have made when we're working on those lower tier badges, the ones that are pretty basic, is that within most of these platforms there's like an automatic quizzing that you can do. And that can be very effective, particularly because we would expect almost all of our student workers to be completing those basic level badges. And the logistics of, a large number of people completing that level is that we probably want some kind of automatic grading system. When we get up to some of the more higher level things, we have assessments put in place where they might have to do a mock reference interview or something where they have to meet with somebody one-on-one, or the assessment is a little more in-depth, something that we have to actually like grade ourselves. And the idea is that hopefully fewer people will be completing those higher level badges, although I would never want to hold a student back, so that would allow us to spend more time doing a more in-depth assessment at that level. And that is one piece of advice I would give to anyone who is considering building digital badges is like, we may not be necessarily a fan of like those multiple choice quizzes that just grade automatically, but depending on how large your student population is that you want to use a badge with, be pragmatic about your assessment methods. Okay. All right, so we also wanted to talk a lot probably about challenges encountered. Shannon is laughing because we encountered a lot of challenges with this project. I think the one that that isn't listed that we should probably mention is that for the past year, our university has been going through a little bit of a transition.
Big transition.
We changed names, so everything had to be rebranded. There was just a lot of things going on at every level, so there was a lot of this transition work that sort of set back our ambitions in this area because that work came first. To some degree tied to that was when we were selecting platforms and getting access to them. The Passport platform was great in a sense, but at the same time, being a branch campus of Purdue and having a mildly complicated history with the main campus, one of the things that we realized was to access the Passport platform, all of our student workers have access, but they have access through a different account than is their standard university account. So it's not a username and login that they use every day, although they theoretically do have it. So like getting student workers to log into the platform and trying to like, okay, like, but you have to do it with this different login and a different password was kind of one big barrier. And to be honest, we are still struggling with how to effectively resolve that.
It took almost a year just to get confirmation that we had access to the platform and it wasn't an accident. So that did set our calendar back significantly.
Yeah. Content creation, just the time that goes into creating the content that you see within each of those modules. So mapping them out and just building out all of that content is something that we continue to work on our end, and we don't have a huge library staff at our institution, so we don't have a lot of people to devote a lot of time to building out the badges. So that was another thing that we kind of grappled with this project.
That was probably why my phone was ringing. They want me on the reference desk, I'm guessing. So.
You effectively resolved that problem.
Yes.
Yes. So, and then creating buy-in. I know there was initially a lot of interest, not just at the library, but other groups on campus that were really interested in the idea of doing digital badging. But that also means that there were more parties to work with during that time. So that created some interesting situations in terms of trying to grapple with creating buy-in at the right levels. So yeah, we grappled quite a bit with that. All right, and then our last slide is actually a URL that directs you to the LibGuide that we've created on digital badging. And we hope that you check it out if you're interested at all in the topic. It does include a bibliography of a number of articles for people who have written on this topic. And I know you had some interesting tidbits from some of those articles?
There was an interesting pair of articles. One was from a librarian who was one of the more early adopters of digital badging, and it outlined why she thought it was a good option to take. And then she wrote a follow-up article a couple years later about why she would never do it again. And her major point with it was that she didn't think it was causing students, she thought students were doing it for the wrong reasons. They were going through the modules just to get the badges and just to earn the thing, but they weren't engaging in the correct spirit of education. And then Sarah and I kind of talked about it and came to the conclusion we didn't care why they were doing it as long as they were doing it. And since our first pilot of this is with our own student workers, they have to do it or they won't have a job. So I can't think of a better motivation than a paycheck right now to get them to actually engage with it. So that's allowed us to do a little bit more experimentation than I might be able to do with a classroom as well, because I have a stick to force them into doing it.
I think we're right at
our time.
Thank you so much, Shannon and Sarah. We truly appreciate you sharing all that information. I did post that link in the chat for everyone to take a look. And I would love to thank Elise, our keynote, for joining us today. We also had April. Thank you so much. If you have any questions regarding the course, feel free to just post us in the chat. You can also email at credo@edmaker.co. But please do send all follow-up questions for sessions in that follow-up discussion that I've posted in the chat a few times now. So feel free to ask me any questions on how to navigate that. I will stay in the chat a few moments to help you. But thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we see you at the next one.